security cameras are there, and they do help ensure that everyone feels good about the playing process. So, speaking of which, the playing process begins. Magnus Carlsen plays d4, and we're off to see the wizard.
Well, we're off to see a Grunfeld, Danny, and no surprises there because Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, one of the leading experts in the Grunfeld, and well, this is it, so we don't even need to explain it. We can watch with our own eyes.
Yeah, the Grunfeld, again, for those of you who don't follow MVL's chess career, you think of two openings when you think of the Frenchman with three names, the Grunfeld against d4 and the Najdorf against e4. Obviously, being a super GM, Robert, he plays other things, but those are his mainstays. And I like that he doesn't make any qualms about it, right? He's not a guy who varies his systems very often, no matter who he's playing, right?
Yeah, he needs no excuses. He knows his opening weapons inside and out, and he keeps resorting to them. And look at this, though. Queen a4 check has made Maxime pause, and unless he's frozen, he is just deep in thought trying to figure out how to respond. And there are several options here. I believe that you can just play bishop d7, but there must be something iffy about it, probably closing the queen's access off the d file, and that's why he played knight to c6.
Yeah, there's a move order there. If we bring up the analysis board that I'm familiar with, it's almost like comparable to a Queen's Indian, when sometimes black plays bishop b4 to induce bishop d2 and then goes back. In this case, after queen a4, bishop d7. A lot of times I believe white will just play queen to b3. The exchange is kind of forced of the knight, and the queen is not really any worse for the journey, right? She's got a new target. You know that white's going to get a big center, so that's kind of a little bit of a tricky move order. And now the queen retreats to c2 at the risk of the d4 pawn hanging. Now I'm a little bit less familiar with the theory. I guess if takes, shake and bake, there's going to be ideas with knight to b5 in some positions.
Oh, absolutely, because the queen on d4, the pawn c7, like you're saying, double attack there. So It's a pawn sacrifice that Maxime does not accept, but it could be one of these positions now where white plays d5 and black says, maybe I should have taken that pawn because you're threatening me and restricting my pieces with this move d5.
Yeah, well, he gets the big center, but as you know about the Grunfeld, everyone, you get the big center, and then what? The idea is black is going to spend the rest of his time trying to undermine it, make exchanges, and hopefully, if black gets his way, have good endgame chances with pressure on the queen side. Sometimes you end up with a 3-on-2 or even a 2-on-1 over here. I'm really curious to see where this goes because, as you said, Robert, Maxime being the Grunfeld expert, but given the amount of time he's taking here, now down by a minute and a half on the clock, Magnus came prepared, and Maxime did not, apparently, for the line we're seeing on the board.
And this knight on b4, while it temporarily is an aggressive piece, it's going to be booted and kicked back around this board. So unfortunately for Maxime, he's burning clock and has some difficult choices ahead. Some ideas that come to mind for white are, well, I can kick the knight immediately with pawn to a3, but I can also put my dark square bishop, develop that. The light square bishop probably going to end up on e2 and white castling kingside. So I like white's position right now, but we should note, Danny, that with a pawn on d5, black can play c6 or e6 in the near future to chisel at white's advanced center.
No, that was the idea I was highlighting and agreed, of course, that's exactly what black wants to do. And let's not forget, if he kicks the knight, there's the potential it has a future on c5 as MVL will play knight a6, I think right away, and indeed he does. So, despite the time taken, which suggests to us some practical advantages for Magnus, I still don't feel like Maxime's position is bad at all, right? I mean, we know it's very close to level, and this is kind of a typical Grunfeld when white advances the white pawns in the center. We know this is coming. So, really, the main thing I'm curious to see, this is early in the match, Robert, is will we get a Grunfeld theoretical lesson today, right? We know I've been making my Italian notes. I'll have to make my Grunfeld notes.
Yeah, we had some e4 lessons, as you're saying. Now we'll get some d4 lessons. It's worth it for everybody. So do take notes if you are tuning in and trying to improve on your chess game. But Danny, I'm kind of coming to agree with you here that I thought at first that white's position should be good. Maybe it's a bit of the Magnus effect. He's playing with the white pieces. In Magnus, we generally trust. But here, knight c5 for black. And there are a variety of ideas that are played in the Grunfeld within a future f5 type of move to really hammer at white's center. I feel like that center could collapse if you're not careful.
No, I mean, it's a common affliction that chess commentators suffer. It's called Magnus-itis. There is a round of vaccines coming around, and we hope that early adopters jump into it, say, and help all of humanity. But yeah, no, jokes aside, we've got Magnus fever usually when he plays, so you assume it's a good line. But I do think MVL has got off to a decent start. The computer did not like the move a4 from the Frenchman, though, for the record. But we're still in kind of a typical Grunfeld. One of the dynamics here, Robert, though, is that the longer black doesn't get e6 or c6, kind of the harder it becomes, right? So you don't really want to let white build on that center and keep it. What's MVL going to do now that Magnus is fully coordinating and supporting these pawns in the center?
Well, with the last few moves, you understand that he's trying to take this knight on f3 and use the d4 square to his benefit. He has a bishop on g7, now the knight on b3, ready to just jump right into that square. So I wouldn't be surprised if Magnus retreats his bishop from g5, where it's aggressive, to e3, where it's a bit more defensive, stopping any shenanigans on that d4 square. But I don't think that Magnus wants to make that kind of retreating move. He would rather continue with the plan he's orchestrated. He's put his pieces on perfect squares. Castling kingside would be the ideal move. But again, bishop takes f3, then knight to d4 is something to think about.
I kind of like your idea of bishop e3, though, because remember, one of the main purposes of bishop g5 initially, everyone, was to stop e6. It's kind of a weird thorn in black's side there. Now that it's served that purpose, the rook on d1 exactly prevents e6. So I think you should have trusted yourself, Robert. Trust your instincts, partner. I've been telling you that for years. Bishop e3 was the best move. The bishop served its purpose. Now the rook on d1 is preventing e6 and c6, the point everybody has discovered attacks. So I think bishop e3 is just what the doctor ordered, and you found it before Magnus did. I love that about you.
I mean, I have both the benefit of the evaluation bar off to the side, and I see what black's idea is. I'm just talking it through with everybody. And Danny, this is one of these positions where if you give white a couple moves, black's counter chances are not going to be so great. So one of the typical ideas mentioned earlier is we start with queen to d7. Now you have the h3 square to get your queen to, but look for Maxime to play f7 to f5 to open up the king side. Perhaps it doesn't work out. It's not actually threatening anything of note, but that is a very common idea to open the center and the f file.
Yeah, although I was going to say that h4 is a common way that white plays these positions once the structure has sort of been solidified. You don't need to necessarily castle anymore, everyone, because your king is kind of safe here, right? Kind of safe should always be used in the center because the center does normally open. But if you're looking to learn from just how they play these positions, seems like it breaks principles. King in the center, double pawns. But actually, the forget the principles. White has a very good position, very solid. Can play h5, and I think Maxime's going to have a little bit of work to do if he's going to repeat this line in the Grunfeld. Though I do like your idea of f5 and maybe even a relocation of the knight to d6, Robert.
Yeah, and I mean, this move e5 gives black the d4 square, so that's another benefit. So if you take en passant, the problem with doing that for white right now is you open up the d file, and what black really needs, especially when you're getting attacked, you need some kind of counter. Sometimes people think, oh, I need to stop an attack by being purely defensive. Sometimes the best defense is a new offense, and that's why he played e5 to give himself the d4 square. And Magnus said, I'm not capturing, I'm not opening the d file. Let me instead put my knight to d5, which is in effect a double threat. You're hitting c7 while defending d4.
Was that little best defense, good offense a shout out to our boy Daryl Morey? We know he's watching secretly. Shout out to that small ball approach in Philly. Really wish he came to Phoenix. Sorry, love you, James Jones. Just kidding. Anyway, all right, h5 played to our NBA lovers in the chat. By the way, speaking of chat, we've got 14,000 of you on Twitch, 11,000 already on YouTube. The show just began, everybody, right? Save some room for later, Augustus. All right, here we go, f5.
But Danny, you're the greatest showman since Hugh Jackman. People came to see you.
He is the last real triple threat. Love you, Hugh. All right, we've got takes g6 takes, and now with the idea that the king side is opening up, the question is, will it backfire for MVL, right? Because bishop h6 is something white does go for occasionally in the Grunfeld. With g6 being weak, I'm also thinking, show us the path in just a moment.
File, and what black really needs, especially when you're getting attacked, you need some kind of counter. Sometimes people think, oh, I need to stop an attack by being purely defensive. Sometimes the best defense is a new offense, and that's why he played e5 to give himself the d4 square. And Magnus said, I'm not capturing, I'm not opening the d file. Let me instead put my knight to d5, which is in effect a double threat. You're hitting c7 while defending d4.
Was that little best defense, good offense a shout out to our boy Daryl Morey? We know he's watching secretly. You know, shout out to that small ball approach in Philly. Really wish he came to Phoenix. Sorry, love you, James Jones. Just kidding. Anyway, all right, H5 played to our NBA lovers in the chat. By the way, speaking of chat, we've got 14,000 of you on Twitch, 11,000 already on YouTube. The show just began, everybody. Right? Save some room for later, Augustus. All right, here we go. F5.
But Danny, you're the greatest showman since Hugh Jackman. People came to see you.
He is the last real triple threat. Love you, Hugh. All right. We've got takes G6 takes, and now with the idea that the king side is opening up, the question is, will it backfire for MVL, right? Because bishop H6 is something white does go for occasionally in the Grunfeld. With G6 being weak, I'm also thinking about rook G1. This is going to get nuts. The computer loves white's position here, but I don't see a clear path, right? We're going to see if Magnus can show us the path in just a moment.
I also want to play ideas like bishop to c4, because if I get d6 in, your king on g8, that's out in the open and might get checkmated. But unfortunately, the knight on b6 covers that c4 square, so you can remove that bishop, and when there's a discovery, blocking a queen's check is much easier than a bishop check on the diagonal.
But I think you're onto something, dude, right? If we could just think like a computer for a second, right? There's ideas with, I was going to say, can you punch d6 first? Because the idea is now anything that lands here is with a tempo. Unfortunately, you gain a tempo. Okay, so Magnus plays queen d3. The threat, everyone, is on b6. How does MVL deal with it with 10 seconds?
No, this is bad. Really bad. D6 is hanging, b6 is hanging, the diagonal's under threat, and queen d5
now. Or queen takes c4. Dude, take c4.
Oh.
And don't think about it again, Magnus. Go on, brush your shoulder off. Queen sack to start the show. Go on, brush your shoulder off. Look at that, everybody. Man. Oh my gosh, we're going to have a great day.
And did you see Magnus? He just shook it off.
Yeah.
I know Taylor Swift released a new album, but he's using the old stuff right there.
Yeah.